Hey guys, I want to welcome you to the weekly Wednesday for the Financial Freedom newsletter, where every week, every Wednesday, we delve into something inspirational, motivational, something excerpt taken from the Financial Freedom weekly newsletter. Wherever you are, if you're listening on Spotify, on iTunes, Google, be sure to click the like, subscribe, share, comment. And without ado, let's get into the show. Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode for the Financial Freedom Podcast. And I have a very special guest for you today, Ilona Phillips. She's a psychotherapist, eating disorder specialist, and group practice entrepreneur. Today is going to be talking all about body image, eating disorders, entrepreneur, mental health. And I'm happy to welcome Ilona to the show. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, happy to connect, and ready to jump in.
Yeah, tell the audience about it, how you got started and, what you do.
Yeah, very good question. So I actually started at Ohio State. That's where I ultimately got my graduate degree and started at the counseling center there. My interest was particularly with addictions, but my supervisor also specialized in eating disorders. And so that seemed like a pretty perfect combination. There are actually a lot of overlap. And then I was ultimately hired by the University of Michigan and continued with the student mental health, but also connecting with faculty and staff and really working around all kinds of mental health issues, but certainly eating disorders, stayed at the forefront for me all along.
Quite interesting. One of the questions is, coming onto the podcast, what are you hoping to gain from it? Are you trying to get brand awareness? Tell us more.
Yeah, both. So, I run, from the University of Michigan Counseling Center, I eventually branched out into private practice, and it wasn't really sustainable for me to do both. So ultimately private practice won, and, it has grown tremendously. We now have about 30 providers, and, thanks to wonderful team and wonderful systems, the practice can run fairly smoothly. And so I'm always looking for, okay, how do we increase our reach? What else can we do? And so my one of my current projects is actually venturing out more into online courses area and, spreading awareness, particularly around eating issues in that domain. So I do have a course. It is called the Empowered Care Program. It is actually specialized for parents and caregivers of children and teens with eating disorders, because there is just such a tremendous lack of information. And we know that early intervention improves treatment outcomes so much. So it's another avenue, to get the word out there. Obviously, I and my team can only serve so many folks. So if there is another way we can get awareness out there and get tools to folks, we're all about it.
Yeah, interesting. So one thing you're talking about is this idea of after the pandemic hit, this whole area of mental health and people taking ownership, how is that manifesting itself in eating disorders, college mental health, body image issues, and we'll go into more detail.
Yeah, absolutely. So the pandemic, of course, as you know, affected pretty much everybody, and we saw such an increase in demand for services. It was really, our practice exploded, and still we couldn't really keep up. On the other hand, it has really opened up the doors to virtual care, and it's quite popular now. We have probably, I would say, still about half and half of, in-person visits and virtual visits. So that continues. We were all affected, but certainly the youngsters, right? I mean, their life is normally booming, right? There's a lot of development, a lot of maturing, a lot of social life developing. And when the pandemic happened, we certainly saw such an increase in mental health issues for the younger population, whether it's college students, high school students, right? So it definitely reflected in all kinds of mental health concerns, increase in anxiety. I mean, anxiety is actually our number one presenting concern as is, but that certainly showed up, especially in the pandemic. And then coping behaviors, right? For some folks, that was more on the addiction side, and certainly such an increase in eating issues as well.
Yeah. What role is does the media have in these mental health, anxiety, depression, as well as social media?
Yeah. That's such a hot topic and continues to be. We know that, social media has had pretty bad rep in terms of targeting audiences based on user experience and what data is collected about our use and how we can then target exactly that. And it's certainly the case for body image. We know, particularly still more in girls and women, right, that social media and the very unrealistic life that is portrayed on social media oftentimes has a very strong impact. Funny story, I actually come from Eastern Europe, and I grew up behind the Iron Curtain, and we had no access to Western media, and we couldn't travel to the West. But when, after 1997 and the Velvet Revolution, the borders opened, that also meant that we had more, access to magazines, television, also from the West. And there's actually plenty of data also showing that, among other things, our body image and eating issues concerns also increased. Now, there are a lot of layers to it, so I certainly don't want to make this terribly simplified, but I can speak from experience quite directly, actually, what social media and exposure to whatever information we consume has on us.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Just kind of, I've been talking to previous guests about just mainstream narratives and just the way, they paint, kind of the media portrays, we're supposed to have this like Disney World fairy tale and everything's, la la, and really doesn't prepare. One question I have is, in this stage, basically, we've gone from this era of, where we didn't have shelter or food, we had the hunter-gatherer, to where, housing, food, all of these are abundant. So now mental disorders, now, we're talking about passion and purpose and, fulfilling your potential. These are kind of, what do you call them? Luxury problems. But the one question is, in terms of, coming like marginalized communities, immigrants, people of color, people of different sexual orientation, how does this play into that arena?
Yeah, that's such an important question, and certainly eating disorders have had a bad rep, sort of being the disorder of white privileged girl, and I can tell you that the stats do not support that. It has affected who is reporting and what kind of data we collect, but we certainly see such a tremendous increase, unfortunately, within all genders, right? Men and certainly folks of color. Some cultures differently than others, right? We know that for some cultures, hate and sort of approach or treatment of body is a protective factor, right? So I remember one of my colleagues back even at Ohio State did a dissertation project on women of color and their relationship to God and their faith, and how that was a particularly protective factor. So, I would want to be very careful about sort of overgeneralizing this. But I will tell you that my caseload and the caseload of my colleagues is pretty diversified when it comes to or diverse when it comes to eating disorders and body image concerns, how it affects different genders, different races and ethnicities. We could certainly talk about the LGBT community, trans folks, right? And it's sort of the pursuit or the behaviors and what the eating disorder looks like may be different. And so with men, you may see more sort of pursuit of the masculine image or thinness, right? Again, it depends who you ask, right? Both in the heterosexual or LGBT community. It is, I'm glad that you're asking this question. I think it's a really important question, and that it helps us to really destigmatize this further and not feed into stereotypes and preventing folks from seeking care, particularly men, for example. It can be quite a bit harder for men to seek treatment for eating issues when it is labeled as the white girl's disorder. So yeah, let me know if there are any more specific questions on this topic. I can certainly go into a lot more detail.
Yeah. Are there any, for the audience, I remember doing my psychiatry rotation. Just for the audience, kind of like predisposing factors, and really how do you combat in this day and age where food is abundant. In the West, kind of the food quality is, there's a lot of additives. And so we're more likely to die of obesity than actually of starvation these days. How can you, should we turn off social media? Should we turn off the TV? These messages, expand upon it.
Yeah, so those are such important questions you're asking, and I really would want to do justice to that, and we probably don't have enough time for that. But even though there's so much abundance of food, there's so many folks in the U.S. that still live in poverty and with food scarcity. Certainly, food scarcity can be an important factor in development of eating disorders, as you can imagine. I do think that sometimes media doesn't do us favors when we overfocus on obesity, or sort of the obesity pandemic, as they say. When we know that, for example, when you look at BMI, the healthiest folks are not in the lower end of BMI numbers, right? And it's often misunderstood. And folks with higher BMIs oftentimes actually have better health, and we just can't reduce measuring health just by that factor. And I think it's really important to mention that genetics, for example, plays such an important part in development of eating disorders. There's such a strong genetic component now. And so it's important to look at family history and both the nature and nurture, right? Genetics and also the environment, and sort of the things that environmentally fuel eating disorder are things such as dichotomies around food, good food, bad food, right? And believing sort of fat phobia, for example, right? That's a really such a strong influence in folks fearing being fat more than other existential factors, and that really fuels actually development of eating disorders. You have to be really, really cognizant of all of that.
Yeah. So and then you're doing some really great. Talk about this. Basically, you're taking your skill and expertise, and you're going trying to build a brand. So talks about ups and downs of entrepreneurship, and where that all fits in. And a lot of entrepreneurs, like I know of a lot of colleagues and friends, they suffer from mental health, either bipolar or anxiety, addiction. So kind of educate the audience on that area.
Yes. So actually, mental health concerns are so much higher in the entrepreneur population, whether, as you mentioned, oftentimes it's ADD, ADHD, it could be bipolar, it is anxiety, it is often depression, often linked to burnout, right? Because entrepreneurship is not necessarily easy. And what gets problematic is that including physicians, right? Physicians often have a hard time finding or seeking care and same thing is with entrepreneurs, seeking care because there are all types of pressures. As an entrepreneur, you should lead the business and you should have it together. And surely you don't have any mental health concerns. And this can be also the pressures of all fields, right? Whether it's medicine, psychiatry in particular. So it gets really complicated, and the numbers are there, and sometimes ADD, ADHD in particular, I see this with many of my colleagues, right? It's a gift, and it can be a hindrance as well, because you might be the visionary who has so many ideas, but then the follow through and execution may be more difficult. And certainly if someone is dealing with a bipolar disorder, that's going to be, difficult if it's not well managed. So let me know. I would be really curious what you have seen sort of amongst your colleagues and even in your education in psychiatry. And I think we often work with residents, and certainly that lifestyle, right, is so difficult. The lack of sleep, barely eating. It's really hard to take care of your mental health in a setting like that.
Yeah. In this day and age, really mental, emotional health, burnout, substance abuse, addiction, it's entered the mainstream consciousness just because a lot of it is based from society that we talked about, genetics. A lot of it's basically we've taken care of our basic needs, and so now we have these other needs now. Really fascinating. And how can people contact you, follow you, reach out to you? I know you have a YouTube channel, Instagram. How can people do
Yes,
that?
yes. Yeah, absolutely. With focus on the eating disorder work, and particularly for parents and caregivers, the best way to find me is my website, which is Ilona Ilona, and Phillips Phillips. I always have to say that, particularly with my first name, so ilonaphillips.com. But also, you can find more information about me at lotusconsultingplc.com. That's my other business. You are right. I do have a YouTube channel and a little bit of Instagram, but I have to admit, social media is not my strength. I will talk to you about eating disorders and mental health all day long, but social media is a different story. But everyone is welcome to check me out on YouTube. Both of those handles are actually on my website, ilonaphillips.com, so you can see that there. And I welcome any questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And for all the audience out there, let's thank Ilona for coming on. The important area of conversation, protecting your mental, emotional health. All of her resources will be in the links and show notes. And thanks so much for coming on to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Always great to connect, and take care.
I hope you really enjoyed that wonderful, inspirational, motivational piece. Again, wherever you are listening, if you liked it, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. We're on everywhere: Spotify, iTunes, Google, Amazon, Audible. And without much ado, be sure to thank this show's sponsors, and we'll see you next week.